Imagine waking up in a pitch-black room that reeks of mildew and sweat, your body rocking violently as if the floor is trying to throw you overboard. This wasn't a nightmare. It was daily life aboard a 17th-century pirate ship. Forget the romantic tales of treasure and adventure. Tonight, we're diving into the brutal reality of pirate life, where every breath was a struggle against disease, starvation, and the constant threat of mutiny. So, before you get comfortable, maybe pull your blanket a little tighter. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. You didn't choose piracy. It chose you, often with a knife at your back. That's how most men found themselves pressed into service aboard these floating hellholes. 1 minute you're drinking in a port tavern, the next you're waking up on a swaying deck with no memory of how you got there. The crew would tell you, laughing, that you'd signed articles while drunk, except you'd never touched pen to paper. Press gangs didn't bother with formalities. They'd club you senseless, drag your unconscious body aboard, and when you came to, someone would explain the facts. Your freedom, gone. Arguments ended with a pistol against your temple, or a cutlass pricking your ribs. Naval ships did it too, but at least they pretended it was legal. Pirates skipped the pretense. It wasn't the grand adventure tavern tales promised, just a cramped, stinking wooden world barely longer than a city block. Every surface moved unpredictably underfoot. The deck rolled like a drunkard, the beams creaked like old bones, and the sea spray stung your eyes with salt. For first-timers, the constant motion meant stumbling like newborns, vomiting over rails while hardened sailors mocked them. Below deck smelled worse than the worst dockside alley, equal parts mould, urine, and the sweet rot stench of unwashed bodies pressed too close. Hammocks swung inches apart in air so thick you could chew it. This is where you'd sleep, if you could call it sleep. The darkness down there was absolute at night, broken only by snores, whispers, and the scuttling of rats bold enough to nip at sleeping men's toes. The crew was a jury-rigged family of killers and cast-offs. Former slaves working beside their captors. Deserters from every navy. Indentured servants who'd burned their contracts. What united them wasn't brotherhood but necessity. Alone, they'd hang together, they might eat. They spoke a dozen languages between them, communicating in pidgin and hand signs when words failed. Some had missing fingers. Others bore rope scars around their necks from near hangings. All had that hollow-eyed look of men with nothing left to lose. Newcomers learned fast that questions about past lives could earn a beating. Better to assume everyone had murdered someone. Quartermasters kept birch rods soaked in brine for whipping complainers. More serious offences, stealing ship's stores, pointing weapons at crewmates, might end with you marooned on some spit of sand with a single-shot pistol and no powder. First-timers often wept when they realised escape was impossible. Seasoned pirates just spat and got back to work. The articles set the rules, a grim compromise between anarchy and order. You'd put your mark on them, or someone made it for you. Equal shares of plunder, but unequal punishments. Steal from the crew, lose your ears. Desert during battle, get shot through the knees. The captain might be voted in, but once chosen, his word was law until the men changed their minds. Democracy with daggers. The captain ate first, drank best, and claimed first pick of captured luxuries. The quartermaster kept the books and doled out punishments. Sailors worked or suffered. Daily tasks were a gauntlet. You'd climb rigging slick with rain until your hands bled, haul ropes that ripped open calluses, pump bilge water until your back gave out. None of it optional. Day one taught the real lesson. This wasn't about treasure or freedom. It was about surviving today to face the same horrors tomorrow. Your old name didn't matter. Your old hopes were dead. You belonged to the ship now, same as the rats in the hold and the barnacles on the hull. And once that truth sank in, you'd never have another moment alone. Not to sleep, not to piss, not even to die if your time came. Your bed was a damp slab of wood in a room that smelled like mouldy bread and sweat. Sometimes you got a hammock if the ship was fancy. but most pirates slept on the deck or in the cramped hold. Your pillow was your arm. Your blanket was your own stinking coat. The ship rocked constantly, more violent than any tavern drunk. One minute you're flat on your back, the next the floor buckles like a spooked horse trying to throw you. Sleep was never rest. When storms hit, the whole crew wedged themselves into corners to avoid being tossed across the room like dice in a cup. Some men tied themselves to beams with rope, others just accepted they might wake up pinned under a barrel. Air below deck hung thick with mildew, salt rot, and the vinegar stink of too many bodies pressed too close. Every breath tasted like the inside of a fisherman's boot. Ventilation was an afterthought, maybe a few grates that did nothing when waves washed over them. In tropical zones, the heat turned the hold into a slow cooker. Men stripped naked and still sweat pooled under them. In northern waters, damp cold seeped into joints until fingers swelled around rope blisters. You slept beside strangers who hacked up lungfuls of phlegm all night. Some men wept in their sleep. Others talked to dead relatives. Snoring came in layers, high whistles, guttural rasps, the occasional choking gasp that made everyone freeze to see if they'd need to drag a corpse out at dawn. The rest learned to sleep through noise or went mad from exhaustion. Rats owned the night shift. They scurried across sleeping faces, nibbled toenails, fought screeching battles in the corners. No amount of ship cats could keep up. You'd wake to find your last biscuit gnawed to splinters, or worse. Blood smeared on your leg where one got bowled. Some crews had rat-killing contests to thin the numbers. The prize was usually first pick of the next raid's spoils. The rats always came back. Morning light didn't so much brighten the hold as reveal its horrors in stages. First the shapes of men curled like shrimp in grey light, then the splotches of mould creeping up the walls, finally the details. Lice crawling through beards, sores on ankles from constant damp, the dark stains where someone vomited or bled and never cleaned it. You'd rub crusted salt from your eyes and stumble toward another day, exactly like the last. Waves slapped the wood inches below your bare ass. Privacy wasn't an option. Men lined up, some squatting while others waited with crossed legs. If the seas were rough, you risked getting flung off mid-business. The resulting stench clung to hair and clothes until you stopped noticing, until new crew gagged and veterans laughed at them. Bathing happened when it rained. Fresh water was too precious to waste on skin. You'd stand shirtless on deck, letting the downpour sluice off months of grime, scrubbing with hands or sand if you were diligent. The salt never really left your pores. It crusted in your eyebrows, lined your nostrils, turned your hair into straw no comb could tame. When you scratched your scalp, black flakes snowed onto your shoulders. Dry land became a fever dream. Solid ground felt alien when you finally stepped ashore. Legs still swaying to phantom waves. You'd press palms against unmoving walls just to feel something stay put. Then it was back to the floating coffin, back to the endless rock and sway, back to sleeping with one ear tuned to the creaks and groans of a wooden beast that could decide to drown you all before dawn. The ship wasn't a backdrop. It was a living thing that shaped every moment, constricting your movements, fouling your lungs, invading your dreams. Its timbers groaned under your feet like an old man's joints. Its ropes lashed your hands when you mishandled them. Its every mood decided whether you ate, slept, or choked on seawater. You didn't sail the ship so much as cling to it, a flea on the back of some half-tamed animal that might buck you into the abyss any second. Hunger wasn't just your stomach growling, it was a permanent crewmate, the kind that gnawed at your ribs until sleep felt like the only escape. And when you did wake up, you faced the same grim reality. Food aboard a pirate ship wasn't about taste, it was about not dying. Breakfast might be hardtack biscuits so stale, you needed to soak them in beer or water just to break them with your teeth. Even then, you'd often find weevils baked right into the dough. Some men tapped their biscuits on the table first to knock the bugs out. The truly hungry just ate them for the extra protein. The biscuits never actually went bad, they just got harder and more infested until they resembled petrified wood more than food. Beef or pork that had been sitting in barrels for months, sometimes years. The meat was dark brown, stringy, and so tough you could use it to sole a shoe. Before cooking, you'd have to soak it for hours to remove some of the salt. Even then, each bite made your mouth pucker. Half the time you were just chewing on gristle and bone fragments. The cook would throw everything into a big pot and make slumgullion, a greasy stew where the primary flavour was salt, and the occasional surprise of an unidentifiable vegetable some pork trader had pawned off on them weeks earlier. Fresh fruits and vegetables disappeared within days of leaving port. Without them, scurvy crept in. Your gums would start bleeding when you chewed. Old wounds reopened. Some men's teeth just fell out. Citrus helped when they had it, but they mostly saved that for the sick. Instead, you got sauerkraut, if you were lucky, sour, slimy cabbage that at least had some vitamin C. The captain might keep a hidden stash of lime juice for emergencies. Everyone else made do with rum. Water was life itself. Each man received about a gallon a day for drinking, cooking, everything. The stuff in the casks grew slimy and warm after weeks at sea. You'd strain it through cloth to remove the worst of the floaters, then hold your nose while drinking. Wasting water meant punishment. A man caught using fresh water to wash his face might get lashed. Thieves who stole from the water stores got marooned. Every swallow was measured, every drop accounted for. Rum didn't quench thirst so much as numb it. The daily ration was half a pint of thick, molasses-smelling liquid that burned all the way down. They diluted it with water when supplies ran low, but never enough to make it safe. Some men traded food for extra rations until they couldn't stand. Others hoarded bottles for particularly bad nights. The alcohol didn't ward off disease like they thought, it just made the constant hunger and fatigue slightly more bearable. Cheese was a rare luxury when they captured merchant ships. Hard, waxy cheeses lasted months without spoiling. The crew would pass chunks around like gold, letting each piece melt in their mouths to make it last. You might get one small bite before it was gone. Then back to the usual salt pork and weevils. Fish should have been plentiful, but catching it wasn't guaranteed. Hooks and line broke. Nets required too much work. If the crew landed a shark, everyone feasted until their bellies ached, then regretted it when the oily meat gave them diarrhea for days. Dolphins that followed ships were off limits. Many sailors thought harming them brought bad luck. So you mostly ate the food that couldn't run away, the barrels of salt-cured provisions growing steadily more disgusting. Time did strange things to ship stores. Flour got maggots, butter turned rancid. Peas and lentils hardened into pellets that had to be boiled for hours. Rice attracted beetles that couldn't be sifted out. Sugar became one solid lump that had to be chiseled. Coffee beans molded together in the damp. Chocolate, when they had it, grew a chalky white coating that didn't stop anyone from eating it. Fires were a constant threat, so cooking happened in a brick-lined area called the caboose when weather permitted. In storms, they'd go hungry rather than risk flames below deck. Days without hot food meant chewing salt pork raw and trying not to think about it. The one copper pot they had turned black from constant use, everything tasting faintly of whatever had burned in it last. The cook wasn't a chef, but whatever crewman drew the short straw. Maybe a one-handed former farmer or a half-blind deckhand. Nobody expected skill, just someone to divide rations evenly and not steal too much for himself. The galley had a few iron pots, some wooden spoons and a knife worn down to a nub from sharpening. Meals were variations on the same theme. Boil whatever won't kill them today. Feast or famine depended entirely on their last raid. After capturing a merchantman, they might eat fresh bread and roasted meat for a week. Then slowly back to rations as the good food spoiled. By the time the ship reached port again, they'd be down to scraping mould off cheese and pounding weevils out of hardtack. Smart captains stocked up on non-perishables. Desperate ones let their crews starve until mutiny became inevitable. Water casks sometimes leaked or spoiled. Ships sailing too far from land ran dry, forcing men to drink their own piss or try distilling seawater with makeshift stills that rarely worked. Lips cracked. The insane ones tried drinking seawater and died screaming as their kidneys failed. The lucky ones got captured by enemies before dehydration took them. There were tricks to stave off hunger. Chewing tobacco killed appetites. Sleeping more meant burning fewer calories. Some men tucked pebbles under their tongues to fool their stomachs. Others traded their rum ration for an extra biscuit, then regretted it when sobriety made the hunger sharper. When all else failed, they'd tell stories about elaborate feasts back home, knowing full well those memories were probably exaggerated by time and desperation. Malnutrition made everything harder. Lack of vitamins meant festering sores that wouldn't heal. Night blindness made evening watches terrifying. Teeth loosened from bleeding gums. Some men wasted away to skeletons before finally succumbing to some minor infection their bodies couldn't fight. Others just got clumsy. One slip on slick rigging could be fatal when dizziness from hunger blurred your vision. The unspoken rule was simple: if you couldn't work, you didn't eat. Sick men got reduced rations unless the surgeon vouched for them. Anyone suspected of faking illness to avoid duties went straight to the brig with no food at all. Some chewed their leather belts when rations ran low. Others saved bits of fat from meat cuts to render into grease they could smear on hardtack. The truly desperate ate the ship's rats, though veteran pirates warned that rat meat could be worse than starvation depending on what the rodents had been eating. Food defined the hierarchy. Food defined the hierarchy. Regular crew fought over the scraps. Boys and slaves ate whatever was left, often just the spoiled bits others refused. During lean times, portions shrank and tensions rose until the next successful raid, or until someone got killed over an extra spoonful of porridge. Then there was the day-to-day reality of eating in constant motion. Bowls slid across tables if you didn't hold them. Spills were inevitable when waves rocked the ship mid-bite. Every meal was a battle against gravity, with the added challenge of keeping weevils from parachuting into your food from overhead beams. The only steady surfaces were your own knees, and even those moved with the ship's roll. Some stipulated equal shares of fresh provisions after captures. Others outlined punishments for stealing food, usually lashing, occasionally something creative like keel hauling, dragging the thief under the ship on a rope. One common rule forbade lighting pipes below deck, not for safety, but because glowing embers attracted cockroaches that would then fall into open food barrels. What nobody prepared you for was the psychological toll. Hunger wasn't just physical. It invaded your dreams, shortened your temper, made every conversation circle back to food. Memories of meals on land took on mythic proportions. The smell of bread baking in some far-off port tortured you more than any enemy cannon. And when supplies ran critically low, you'd catch crewmates eyeing each other with a new kind of calculation. Much like everything else aboard, food wasn't about pleasure or comfort. It was fuel, barely adequate at best, life-threatening at worst. Every bite carried risk, every swallow a reminder of how precarious survival really was. And all this before considering what happened when bad food actually made you sick. If you somehow made it to the medical station, usually just a corner of the hold with a blood-stained table, you were already in bad shape. The so-called doctor might have been a failed apothecary's apprentice, or a butcher who'd traded cleavers for scalpels. Real physicians didn't sign on for piracy. You got the guy who couldn't hack it on land. His kit was a horror show, rusty saws for limbs, a metal gag for tooth extractions, thread and needles for stitching wounds that should have killed you. Everything crusted with old blood no amount of seawater could wash clean. The closest thing to anesthesia was a bottle of rum passed between patient and surgeon, both of you drinking until the pain seemed like someone else's problem. Toothaches happened to everyone. Hardtack biscuits and no sugar rotted even young men's teeth within months. When the pain got bad enough, you'd let the surgeon take a look. He'd force your mouth open with that iron gag, poke around with fingers blackened by gunpowder stains, then make his diagnosis. No saving it. Then came the pliers. long-handled things that looked more suited for pulling nails than molars. The sound of roots snapping echoed in your skull long after the tooth came free. Wounds festered fast in the damp air. Even small cuts could balloon into infections that turned flesh green. The surgeon's solution was usually the same: pour alcohol on it and hope, vinegar if they were out of rum. Boiling tar for the worst cases. They pressed the searing paste into open wounds to cauterize them. The smell of burning flesh mixed with oakum and salt air created a perfume you never forgot. Amputations were common. A snapped rope could crush fingers. A falling spar might shear off toes. Gangrene travelled up limbs fast in the filthy conditions. The surgeon would strap you to the table, offer you a belt to bite down on, and start sawing. The goal was to get through bone before you bled out or passed out from agony. Tourniquets were just rope twisted tight with a stick. Stitching the stump closed was optional. Saws weren't the worst of it. Bullet wounds required probing with unwashed metal rods to find the lead ball inside you. Broken bones got straightened by brute force. 3 men holding you down while a 4th yanked the limb into place. Hernias from heavy lifting were shoved back inside with fingers slicked with lard. Every procedure came with the same soundtrack: your screams, the crew's jokes, and the ever-present creak of the ship. Sterilization wasn't a concept they understood. The same knife that gutted fish in the morning might lance a boil in the afternoon. Bandages were just old rags, reused until they disintegrated. Some surgeons thought pus was a sign of healing. They'd leave wounds open to let the bad humours out. The result was predictable. Men died from scratches that land doctors could have fixed with a clean bandage and soap. Fever was a death sentence more often than not. The surgeon would diagnose by pressing hands to your forehead, then prescribe whatever seemed least likely to kill you faster. Maybe a foul-tasting tonic of ground herbs and alcohol. Possibly bleeding you with leeches if he was fancy. If your fever broke, it wasn't thanks to the treatment, just blind luck and a strong constitution. Disease spread faster than gossip. One case of dysentery could empty the hold as men collapsed with bloody flux. Typhus arrived with lice and turned strong sailors into shivering wrecks. Yellow fever made your skin the colour of old parchment before you drowned in your own fluids. The surgeon's only quarantine method was throwing the sickest men into a separate corner to die apart from the crew. Scurvy was the silent killer. It crept up slowly. First sore gums, then loose teeth, then old wounds reopening for no reason. Some captains stocked lemons or limes to prevent it, but most didn't bother until men started dropping. By then it was too late. The surgeon could press citrus juice into bleeding gums, but the damage was done. Men perished from injuries that should have been minor, their bodies too weak to heal even small cuts. The medicine chest was a joke. A few jars of questionable powders, some dried herbs gone stale, maybe a tin of salve that smelled like rancid butter. Laudanum opium dissolved in alcohol was the closest thing to real pain relief. They doled it out sparingly, and only to men who could still work. If you were too far gone, you got a water ration and a dark corner to die in. Surgery at sea had its own special challenges. The ship never stopped moving. A sudden wave could turn a careful incision into a fatal slip. The surgeon worked with one hand gripping the table, the other trying to hold steady. Assistants were usually just deckhands with strong stomachs. Their job was to pin you down when you thrashed and mop up the blood after. Wearing a dried toad around your neck to prevent gout. Rubbing mercury on sores that refused to heal. Drinking gunpowder mixed in water for strength. The surgeon might not believe in these cures, but when men started dying, even nonsense seemed worth trying. Beyond extractions, there were other horrors. Some surgeons would drill into abscesses with hand-cranked bits to release the pressure. Others prescribed mouthwashes of salt water and rum that burned like hellfire. A lucky few got primitive fillings, lead pressed into cavities to stop the ache. Unlucky ones had nerves yanked out with hooked probes when the pain grew unbearable. The surgeon's reputation mattered. A good one could save more men than he killed. A bad one might be tossed overboard after one too many botched operations. Crews sometimes mutinied just to get rid of a butcher in surgeon's clothing. The captain always got first pick of medical care. Ordinary crew took their chances with whatever hack remained. Women had it worse if they even made it onto the ship at all. The rare female pirates or captives needing treatment faced extra humiliation. Some surgeons refused to treat them entirely. Others saw it as an opportunity. Privacy wasn't an option, just a curtain strung up while half the crew listened outside. Childbirth at sea was almost always fatal for mother and baby. Chronic conditions were ignored until they became emergencies. Men worked with ruptured hernias, untreated ulcers, bones healed crooked from old breaks. The surgeon only intervened when the problem threatened your ability to pull rope or fire cannons. Pain was background noise. Another part of shipboard life, like hunger and exhaustion, recovery wasn't a thing they did well. You either got better fast or you didn't get better. Convalescents were put back to work as soon as they could stand, often reopening wounds in the process. Those too weak to move were left to lie in their own filth until they healed or died. The infirmary, if it existed at all, was just the quietest corner of the gun deck. Mental health treatment amounted to extra rum rations for the melancholy and chains for the violent. No one understood PTSD from battles or months at sea. They just called it sailor's melancholy and ignored it until the sufferer jumped overboard or got himself killed intentionally during a fight. Death was the surgeon's most frequent outcome. The crew expected it, so did he. Success wasn't measured in lives saved, but in bodies disposed of efficiently. The sea took those it wanted. Your job was to fight for every extra day and hope the surgeon's tools stayed in their case a little longer. And if you were injured, the choices were even grimmer. A cannon misfire could turn your limb into spaghetti in seconds. That's what happened to at least one pirate whose crewmates described the aftermath. Bones shattered like porcelain, muscle hanging in ribbons. The captain would take one look at the mess and issue his verdict: leave the arm, and he dies. Take it off, and he might live. Either way, you were watching. Amputations weren't rare. They were routine. Every pirate knew at least 3 men missing fingers, hands, or legs. The tools were crude. A butcher's saw, maybe a belt for a tourniquet if someone thought ahead. Whiskey or rum served as both antiseptic and anesthetic, though it never dulled the pain enough. The surgeon's mates would pin you down while he worked, their grip leaving bruises no one would ever see under the blood. The sawing took longer than you'd expect. Bone doesn't give, like wood. 2 minutes of screaming could stretch into 10, while the surgeon hacked through what the saw couldn't finish. They didn't bother with flaps of skin to cover the stump, just seared the raw end with hot tar to stop the bleeding. Shock killed as many men as the initial injury. Some passed out from blood loss before the job was done. Others thrashed so hard they had to be tied to the mast until they exhausted themselves. A few just stared at the missing limb like it might grow back if they willed it hard enough. The lucky ones woke up with a flask pressed to their lips and a week's reprieve from duties. The unlucky ones woke up dead. Infection was nearly guaranteed. The bandages were old sailcloth, reused until they fell apart. Rats nibbled at the edges when you slept, drawn by the scent of rotting flesh. Changing dressings meant peeling away layers of pus-soaked rag, sometimes taking bits of skin with them. The surgeon might pour more alcohol on it to clean the wound, which felt like being branded all over again. Gangrene moved fast in the damp ship air. First a red line creeping up from the stump, then blackened skin that smelled sweet in a way no healthy thing ever should. Finally the fever that cooked men from the inside out. Those who survived the operation often begged for death once gangrene set in. Some got it. Others lingered until the crew tossed them overboard to shut them up. Burns were worse than cuts. A spark from the cannon's linstock could set your shirt ablaze before you noticed. Powder burns etched faces with red-black craters where skin used to be. Treatment was cold seawater and lard smeared on with bare hands, anything to stop the air from touching raw nerves. Some men spent weeks curled in the fetal position, their backs against the hull to ease the pain. Eye injuries happened constantly. Congealed salt spray made everyone rub their eyes with filthy hands until infections set in. The lucky ones just lost an eye. They'd wear a patch and keep working. The unlucky ones got sympathetic ophthalmia, where the infection jumped to the good eye and left them completely blind. Those men never lasted long aboard ship. Broken bones rarely healed right. The surgeon would reset them by feel, yanking until something clicked. No splints, just strips of damp linen that tightened as they dried. After that, you either fought through the pain or got thrown in the brig for malingering. Many pirates walked with limps for life, their knees or ankles having knitted together at odd angles. Falling from the rigging was a death sentence. Even if the impact didn't kill you, shattered pelvises or spinal fractures left you paralyzed. There was no sick bay, just a corner of the hold where broken men waited to die. The crew might toss you extra rations for a day or two until someone decided those rations were wasted. Then they'd argue about whether a pistol ball, accidentally, striking your temple would be mercy or murder. Head wounds bled spectacularly, but often looked worse than they were. Scalps bit open like overripe melons, coating faces in red masks. The real danger was inside the skull bone fragments pressing on brains, slow bleeds that turned coherent men into babbling wrecks. Some recovered with nothing worse than a scar. Others forgot their own names before the fever took them. A glancing hit could leave a man pinned under debris, his legs crushed but still alive. Some crews kept pry bars handy to lift beams off trapped shipmates. Others used axes. One pirate's journal describes a man who lasted 2 days with a spar through his gut before the sharks got him during burial. Gut wounds meant certain death. The surgeon could stitch up arms and legs, but punctured intestines poisoned the blood within hours. Those men got set apart with extra rum and a loaded pistol if they wanted it. Some chose drowning instead, wriggling overboard while their shipmates pretended not to notice. Dislocations were simple but agonizing. A shoulder popped out during a storm might stay that way until calm seas let the surgeon work. His method was brute force, yanking the limb until it snapped back into place. Some men fainted, some bit through their own tongues. Most just screamed loud enough to scare the gulls. Crushed hands were common. A swinging block could smash fingers against the mast. A snapped halyard might take your whole hand if it wrapped tight enough. Many pirates ended up with stubs where their fingers used to be, useless for fine work but still capable of hauling rope. Those who lost both hands usually didn't last the month. Disease compounded everything. A simple fracture could turn septic when shipboard filth got into the wound. Malaria spiked fevers higher in men already weak from blood loss. Scurvy made bones brittle so they snapped under normal strain. The healthiest man aboard was still one bad day away from being useless cargo. Aftercare didn't exist. You were back on light duty as soon as you could stand. Climbing with one arm, tying knots with missing fingers, scrubbing decks while your fresh stitches pulled apart. Complaining earned you extra duties, or the lash. Everyone worked injured. The only difference was how recently it had happened. Prosthetics were rare, but not unheard of. Pirates with rich hauls might buy a carved wooden leg between voyages. Others rigged hooks from bent nails or strapped on padded stumps to kneel easier. None of it worked well, but looking functional kept you fed another day. The ship itself fought recovery. Salt air stung open wounds. Rats chewed at bandages when you slept. Even breathing hurt if you'd cracked ribs in a fall. The environment was a constant test. If you could heal here, you must be tough enough to last. Ironically, battle wounds had better survival odds than peacetime accidents. A pirate crew, after a fight, would pool medical supplies to patch up fighters. But slip while swabbing the deck on a calm day. That was on you. Others hid them under layers of grime and fabric. The lucky ones lived long enough for the scars to pale. The rest joined the growing tally of men who'd gone to port ahead. Amputees swore they could still feel missing limbs during night watches. Medicine couldn't fix anything, just drag you back across the line between functional and useless. The real horror wasn't the injuries themselves, it was the indifference. Your suffering only mattered so far as it affected your work. Screams were background noise. Blood washed out of the deck planks with seawater and went forgotten by tomorrow. Everyone knew they were one accident away from becoming the next lesson in suffering. And if you broke the rules, punishment was swift and brutal. Justice aboard a pirate ship wasn't blind, it was drunk. One day you might get away with stealing an extra biscuit. The next, the same offence could earn you 40 lashes with a rope soaked in brine. The rules existed, sure. Articles of agreement outlined shares of loot and proper conduct. But enforcement depended on who caught you, how the captain felt that morning, and whether the crew was bored enough to want a spectacle. A man caught shirking duties might have to wear a wooden block around his neck for a day. Fight with a crewmate over cards, you'd be tied back to back with your rival until you made peace. Rations got cut for small thefts, half portions for a week, or maybe just the weevil-filled biscuits no one else wanted. The punishment never quite fit the crime because the point wasn't justice. It was reminding everyone who held the power. The victim got tied to the mast or a grating, shirt stripped off to show scars from previous offences. The boatswain swung a thick rope or a knotted cord, sometimes dipped in tar to make it heavier. 10 lashes were standard for first offences. The whip split skin on the first strike, drew blood by the 5th. Seasoned pirates knew to bite down on leather to muffle screams. Showing pain just encouraged them. Serious crimes got creative. Stealing from the shared plunder might mean marooning, left on some barren island with a jug of water and a pistol containing one shot. Cowardice during battle could earn you a keel hauling, tied to a rope and dragged under the ship's hull, while barnacles scraped your flesh off. Some crews used sweating, forcing the offender to run laps around the deck under armed guard until he collapsed from exhaustion. Others favoured the walding, where a heavy band was tightened around the forehead until eyes bulged and sanity frayed. The captain's mood decided everything. One day he might laugh off a stolen bottle of rum. The next, the same offence could get you chained in the bilge with the rats. Men learned to read his face like weather patterns. Too much sun meant leniency, gathering clouds signalled coming storms. Some captains staged punishments just to keep the crew in line. Others only intervened when chaos threatened profits. Quartermasters held strange power. They weren't officers exactly, more like referees appointed to enforce the articles. A good one balanced fairness with fear. Too harsh and the crew mutinied. Too soft and discipline crumbled. Their whippings were methodical, delivered with cold precision rather than anger. The worst ones enjoyed their work a little too much, lingering between strokes to let the pain sink in. Women faced different rules. Female pirates were rare, but those who made it aboard often faced harsher penalties for stepping out of line. A man might get lashes for theft. A woman could be stripped to the waist and flogged twice as hard to make an example. Sexual misconduct accusations led to swift, brutal punishments regardless of truth. The articles didn't protect anyone equally in practice. Drunkenness was tolerated until it wasn't. Most crews allowed heavy drinking during downtime. But start a fight while drunk or vomit in the wrong place, and the same rum that fueled your fun became part of your punishment. Some captains forced offenders to drink seawater until they puked. Others made them wear a barrel with armholes cut out. The drunkard's cloak for days at a time. Mutiny carried the ultimate penalty. Get caught plotting against the captain and you'd swing from the yardarm before sunset. Not every attempted mutiny ended in hanging though, sometimes the plotters won. Then it was the old captain's turn to beg for mercy he'd never shown others. Successful mutineers often kept up appearances by staging a formal trial, complete with speeches about betrayal before the inevitable sentence. The articles gave crews more rights than Navy ships, but also more ways to suffer for breaking them. Every pirate signed, or was forced to sign, the ship's code upon joining. Copies got nailed to the mast, or kept with the quartermaster. 2 or 3 pages spelling out shares, duties, and prohibitions. Some banned gambling. Others forbade lighting candles below deck after dark. Most had vague clauses like, no unnecessary cruelty, that somehow never prevented what happened next. Even minor rules mattered when the crew wanted blood. A man could technically be flogged for bringing a woman aboard without consent, or for blowing out another sailor's lantern, or for whistling on deck. Superstition said it summoned storms. The absurdity didn't matter. What mattered was the crew's mood when you got caught. Punishments followed patterns. Small offences got dealt with immediately. A punch to the face, extra night watches. Serious crimes waited for formal proceedings. The accused could defend himself, call witnesses, even appeal to the captain. Not that it usually helped. Discipline changed with circumstances. After a successful raid, captains turned a blind eye to drunken brawls. During lean times, stealing an apple could mean losing a hand. Smart pirates saved their rule-breaking for periods of plenty. The system wasn't fair. But it wasn't meant to be. This wasn't London with its courts and barristers. Out here, order relied on fear more than justice. The threat of violence kept men in line better than any code ever could. Every lash, every keel-hauling served as a reminder, step out of line, and the crew becomes your judge, jury, and executioner. And through it all, the emotional toll was relentless. Time played tricks on you at sea. Days blurred together until you couldn't remember if it was Tuesday or Sunday. You started missing strange things. The weight of a full mug that didn't slosh over your hand, the feeling of walking in a straight line for more than 3 steps. Nights were the only reprieve, but even then you couldn't escape the sounds of coughing men and the creaking timbers that reminded you how fragile your wooden world really was. The horizon never changed. Just an endless line of water taunting you with its sameness. You'd stare at it during night watches, whispering, "Please don't sink," like a prayer to no one in particular. Some men carved notches into beams to mark time passing. But what was the point? Tomorrow would look exactly like today. Same salt pork, same aching back, same faces worn thin by exhaustion. Land wasn't about home anymore. It was about variety. The idea of choosing what to eat instead of choking down what you were given. Walking somewhere without constantly bracing against the roll of waves, fresh water that didn't taste like something died in it. You didn't dream of families or old loves, just the simple luxury of predictable boredom. Sensory deprivation warped minds. No new smells except rotten salt. No new sights except water and sails. Your world shrank to a few hundred square feet of splintered wood, and after months of that, even the worst port towns started seeming beautiful. The ship's rhythm was oppressive in its familiarity. The same tasks at the same hours with the same people. You could time your heartbeat by the watch changes. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. But the off time wasn't rest, just waiting for your next shift, listening to the sounds of men who'd eventually bury you at sea. Sleep deprivation made everything worse. Night watches left you stumbling through daylight duties, half blind with exhaustion. Some men hallucinated, seeing phantom ships or dead crewmates in the rigging. Others just got mean, picking fights over nothing because anger was easier than admitting they couldn't take another month of this. Language deteriorated first. Conversations shrank to grunts and nods. Jokes got recycled until they weren't funny anymore, then kept getting said anyway. Men forgot words for simple things, substituting gestures or made-up terms. After 6 months at sea, some crews developed their own pidgin language no outsider could understand. Every cough, every fart, every muttered nightmare was public knowledge. You learned things about your shipmates no one should know. The way one man whimpered in his sleep, another's fear of spiders, a third's tendency to pick his nose and flick it when he thought no one was looking. Superstitions flourished in the mental vacuum. Whistling summoned storms. Killing an albatross meant certain doom. Some men wore the same unwashed shirts for months, convinced their luck lived in the fabric. Others refused to say certain words aloud, mouthing them silently instead. The irrational made as much sense as anything else out here. Depression settled in like a fog. Men stopped maintaining their gear, letting ropes fray and blades rust. Blank stares became common during night watches. Just hollowed-out men counting waves until their shift ended. Suicide attempts often came during storms when a fall overboard could be written off as an accident. Violence simmered beneath everything. Small annoyances, a stolen spoon, a snore that never stopped, piled up until someone snapped. Most fights ended with black eyes and split lips. Some didn't end at all. Crews turned a blind eye to the occasional missing man, writing it off as another wave-taken soul, rather than admit someone had snapped and shoved him over the side. The captain's moods dictated crew morale. A fair leader kept despair at bay with extra rum or promises of plunder. A cruel one accelerated the rot arbitrary punishments, withheld rations, public humiliations that made men stop caring whether they lived or died. Mutinies rarely started over gold. They started over this slow erosion of the will to keep breathing. Scrubbing the deck for the 10th time that week. Checking rigging that hadn't changed since yesterday, meaningless busywork filled the hours between terror and boredom. Men clung to these rituals because without them there was nothing to prove they hadn't already died and gone to some watery purgatory. Letters from home, if any arrived in port, often went unread for days. The disconnect was too painful. That person, writing about apple harvests or new babies, wasn't real anymore. You were a ghost to them, same as they were to you. Some men burned letters unopened, others slept with them under their shirts until the paper disintegrated from sweat and salt. Dreams turned strange. You'd wake up convinced you'd been walking through a field or sitting at a table, only to open your eyes to the same wooden ceiling. Some men talked in their sleep, having full conversations with people long dead. Others woke screaming from nightmares indistinguishable from their waking hours. The sea itself became a character in your mental unravelling. It whispered during night watches. It laughed when storms tore at the sails. You started attributing malice to its movements. That wave hit you on purpose, that calm stretch was just it, lulling you into complacency. Sailors who'd spent years aboard often described the ocean as an old enemy they'd learned to tolerate. Music kept some men sane. Shanties turned into lifelines. But even songs got twisted over time, lyrics morphing into bleak jokes about drowning or rotting at sea. The lack of control ate at you. Your life depended on wood and rope holding together, on men you barely liked, not making mistakes, on weather patterns no one understood. Every decision belonged to someone else. When you ate, when you slept, when you risked death for their ambitions. The helplessness wore men down faster than the labour. Isolation wasn't about being alone, it was about never being alone while feeling completely unseen. Surrounded by bodies, but unable to connect. Some men took lovers just for the human contact, regardless of gender or preference. Others withdrew completely, becoming shadows that the crew stopped acknowledging unless absolutely necessary. Even in calm seas, there was always something to patch, clean, or adjust. Fatigue became part of your skeleton. You forgot what it felt like to not have aching shoulders or salt-cracked hands. Rest was just the brief pause between one back-breaking task and the next. You stopped planning beyond the next watch. Future became an abstract concept. There was only now, and the now was always some variation of wet, hungry, and tired. Men who talked about after this voyage were either new or delusional. The veterans knew better. This wasn't a journey with an end. It was just life until your luck ran out. Hope was dangerous. It made the present harder to bear. Better to embrace the numbness, to stop expecting anything to improve. The most adjusted pirates weren't the optimistic ones. They were the ones who'd made peace with the grinding misery and found small satisfactions in hating it together. And yet, some found a strange kind of freedom in it. Freedom on a pirate ship was a carefully crafted illusion. The open ocean might have seemed like liberation after fleeing a sugar plantation or naval impressment, but the reality was more complicated. You weren't free of hierarchy, just trading one master for many. You weren't free of rules, just swapping royal edicts for articles voted on by men who'd stab you over a bottle of rum. The sea didn't care about your dreams of liberty. Pirates loved to talk about their independence. No kings demanding taxes. No magistrates throwing debtors in jail. No landowners whipping workers for lazy harvesting. The articles promised equal shares and fair treatment. But fair depended entirely on who was holding the cutlass that day. The crew might agree to split plunder evenly, then cheat you when dividing the spoils. The threat of violence never disappeared. Merchant ships had discipline enforced by officers. Pirate ships had discipline enforced by whichever drunk crewmate took offence first. You might avoid navy floggings only to face a pirate keel-hauling for accidentally stepping on someone's hat. Rules existed when convenient and vanished when inconvenient. That wasn't freedom. For pressed men, the difference between navy and pirate life was negligible. Both meant back-breaking labour under threat of punishment. Both fed you maggoty biscuits and rancid water. Both could hang you for disobedience. The main distinction? The promise of prize money, rarely materialised after accounting for repairs, bribes, and the captain's oversized share. Many former Navy men realised too late they'd traded one floating prison for another. Ships needed constant maintenance just to stay afloat, which meant endless work for everyone aboard. Storms didn't care if you were a free spirit, they'd sink you just the same as any Navy vessel. Navigation errors meant starvation, leaks meant drowning. The ocean granted no more liberty to pirates than it did to merchants, it just killed them all equally. Ports offered no real escape either. Every shoreline tavern might hide a Navy informant. Every friendly face could be the one to sell your location for silver. Even in pirate havens like Nassau, you slept with one eye open. The price of freedom was constant suspicion of allies, of locals, even of your own crew. Merchant sailors might get cheated by their employers, but at least they didn't have to worry about their shipmates selling them to the gallows. The democratic ideals didn't match reality. Yes, pirate crews voted on captains. They also murdered captains who disagreed with popular opinion. A fair trial. For breaking rules meant speaking your defence while surrounded by armed men who'd already decided your guilt. Pirate justice swung wildly between leniency and brutality depending on how bored the crew felt that week. Some pirates confessed they missed land life in their weaker moments. Not the oppression, just the simplicity. Knowing where your next meal came from. Sleeping through a night without someone screaming about incoming ships. Walking somewhere without fearing every stranger might recognise your face from a wanted poster. The thrill of raiding wore thin after the fifth merchant vessel yielded nothing but sacks of mouldy rice. The work never lessened. Pirate ships required more labour than Navy ones. No dockyards for repairs, no supply lines for food. Every captured splinter needed patching by exhausted men. Every sail demanded mending by fingers stiff with salt sores. Freedom meant working yourself raw just to keep your floating world from crumbling. Merchant sailors at least got paid vacations between voyages. Pirates rested when they died. Personal freedoms eroded over time. Early in a voyage, crews might tolerate drunken brawls. After months of dwindling supplies, those same fights ended with bodies tossed overboard. The articles prohibiting gambling or nighttime noise, enforced strictly when supplies ran low, ignored completely during feasts. Liberty expanded and contracted like a sail in shifting winds, never predictable, never truly under your control. The psychological toll was heavier than expected. Making choices for yourself sounded great until every decision carried mortal stakes. Picking the wrong target could mean battling a warship instead of a defenseless trader. Choosing the wrong ally might land you in chains on a navy deck. Some pirates admitted they'd rather take orders than bear the constant stress of self-determination. It was easier to follow a captain's bad plan than to help make a worse one. Women and minorities discovered pirate equality had limits. Former slaves still got the most dangerous assignments. Female pirates faced harassment disguised as camaraderie. Non-European crew members often received smaller shares under flimsy excuses. The much-vaunted pirate brotherhood functioned best when everyone looked and acted the same. Deviate from the norm, and the freedom they celebrated suddenly had exceptions. The most successful pirates weren't free spirits, they were disciplined operators. Blackbeard cultivated his terrifying image deliberately. Bartholomew Roberts enforced strict sobriety during operations. The legends of anarchic pirate utopias ignored how quickly disorderly crews sank themselves through drunkenness or infighting. Real pirates understood. Too much freedom got everyone killed. Retirement was nearly impossible. Where does a famous pirate go to quit? Port towns that once welcomed you would turn you in for amnesty. Your own crew might murder you for trying to leave with their share of treasure. Even if you escaped with gold, you'd spend the rest of your life watching for Navy agents in every crowd. The freedom to leave only existed if no one knew your name, and pirate reputations spread faster than their ships. The sea changed men. After years of pirate life, many couldn't readjust to land. They paced like caged animals in taverns. They startled at loud noises, hands flying to missing cutlasses. Some kept waking at midnight for watches that didn't exist anymore. The ocean's rhythm etched itself into their bones, leaving them stranded between two worlds. Too wild for civilization, too civilized for the brutal freedom they'd idealize in hindsight. In private moments, even the most hardened captains admitted the truth. Piracy wasn't the romantic freedom sung about in later tales. It was a desperate bargain, a trade of one set of shackles for another. They'd fled the crushing weight of kings, navies, and merchant bosses, only to find themselves bound to new masters, the relentless sea, the whims of their crew, and the ever-looming threat of betrayal or starvation. The ocean didn't care about their dreams of wealth or glory. The Articles of Agreement, their so-called Code of Honor, didn't guarantee fairness. It just dressed up their brutal survival in the guise of order. The only liberty piracy offered was the grim choice of which force would break you first: the crown's gallows, the captain's temper, or the ocean's merciless depths. Yet, amid this chaotic existence, there was a surprising sense of structure, a fragile attempt at fairness that held the crew together, barely. It was a world governed by the Articles of Agreement, a makeshift constitution scratched onto weathered parchment, signed with ink or blood, and often nailed to the ship's mast for all to see. These rules were the thin thread keeping the crew from tearing itself apart. They dictated everything: how to split the plunder, who got what job, and what happened if you crossed the line. It wasn't democracy, it was organized brutality with a ledger, a system where every man knew his place, his share, and the price of defiance. The articles began with the division of loot, the lifeblood of any pirate crew. After a raid, the quartermaster oversaw the tally with a hawk's eye, ensuring no coin or trinket went unaccounted. Captains claimed 1.5 to 2 shares, reflecting their leadership and the weight of their decisions. Skilled hands carpenters who patched leaky hulls, gunners who kept cannons roaring, earned a bit more, maybe 1.25 shares. Regular crewmen, the backbone of the ship, got 1 share each. Even the ship's boys, barely old enough to haul a rope, received a 1/2 or 1/4 share, a nod to the crew's pretense of fairness. But this wasn't charity. Stealing from the common hall was a betrayal of the brotherhood. One captain's log tells of a sailor caught hiding 2 silver buttons in his boots. 30 lashes across his back, the crack of the whip echoing over the deck as a warning to others. Another record mentions a man marooned on a barren sandbar for pocketing a gold ring, left with nothing but a pistol and a single shot. The articles didn't just promise equality, they enforced it with blood. Duties aboard ship were assigned with the same ruthless precision. Life at sea was a relentless grind, and the articles ensured no man could shirk his share. Watches ran in 4-hour shifts, day and night, with men stationed at the helm, in the crow's nest, or scrubbing the deck. During battle, every soul had a role. Some hauled sails to outrun pursuers, others loaded cannons with grape shot, and the boldest prepared to board enemy vessels, cutlasses gleaming. Even mundane tasks like cooking rotated to prevent any one man from being stuck with the thankless job of stirring rancid stew in a swelteringly cramped galley. The quartermaster, the crew's elected enforcer, kept a ledger of assignments, settling disputes with a word or a fist. Laziness wasn't tolerated. Skip your watch, and your rum ration might be cut for a week. Persist, and you'd find your hammock slung next to the latrine, the stench a daily reminder of your failure. One crewman, caught sleeping during a midnight watch, was tied to the mast for a day, the sun blistering his skin as the crew jeered. Captains held power, but it was a fragile throne built on competence, not divine right. Unlike Navy ships, where officers ruled by birth or commission, pirate captains were elected by the crew. A good captain led by example, navigating storms and spotting rich prizes. A bad one, too cruel, too cowardly, or just unlucky, could be deposed in a heartbeat. Boats weren't always peaceful. They often happened with cutlasses drawn or pistols cocked. A deposed captain might stay on as a regular hand, swallowing his pride to avoid a worse fate. Others, less fortunate, were cast adrift in a leaky rowboat with a day's worth of water and a prayer. One account tells of a captain voted out after a failed raid, left on a dinghy with a single oar, his former crew watching as he vanished into the horizon. The system kept captains accountable, but it also bred tension. Every decision, whether to chase a merchant ship or flee a Navy frigate, was scrutinized. A captain's authority lasted only as long as his crew's faith in him, and that faith could evaporate faster than morning mist. The articles governed more than just loot and labour. They reached into every corner of shipboard life. Gambling was often banned outright. Dice games sparked too many brawls, with men stabbing each other over a bad roll. Smoking below decks after dark was forbidden, not for fear of fire, but because embers attracted roaches that gnawed through precious food stores. Lights-out rules ensured men were rested for their watches, with violators losing a day's share or scrubbing the bilge as punishment. Noise was another enemy. Arguments after dark disrupted sleep, so the articles often mandated silence after a certain hour. One ship's code fined loud talkers a day's rum, while another forced offenders to clean the deck with a toothbrush-sized scrubber. These rules weren't about comfort, they were about survival in a floating world where one mistake could doom everyone. Women aboard pirate ships were a rare and complicated matter, their presence tightly regulated by the articles. Some crews banned female passengers entirely, claiming they brought bad luck or divided loyalties. Others allowed women but laid out strict rules. Rape or harassment could mean a walk off the plank or a keel hauling, though enforcement varied with the crew's mood. Female pirates, like Anne Bonny or Mary Read, were exceptions, earning full shares if they fought as fiercely as the men. Yet even they slept with a dagger close, knowing trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. One ship's article specified that any woman aboard had to be approved by a crew vote, and even then she was watched like a hawk. Another code promised lashes for any man who troubled a female crewmate, but the reality often depended on the captain's favour or the quartermaster's bias. Medical care was another cornerstone of the articles, reflecting the brutal necessity of keeping a crew alive. The ship's surgeon, often a former Navy man or a kidnapped physician, commanded a higher share. Sometimes 2 full portions, because his skills were the difference between life and death. A botched amputation or an untreated fever could cripple the crew's fighting strength. The articles also outlined compensation for injuries: lose an eye, and you might claim 100 pieces of 8 from the common purse; lose a hand, and it could be 400. A leg? Up to 600 depending on the ship. These payouts weren't charity. They acknowledged that wounds suffered for the crew's gain deserved reward. One log recounts a gunner who lost a foot to cannon fire, receiving 500 pieces and a crutch carved from captured timber. But no amount of coin could replace a limb, and the surgeon's tools, saws, cauterizing irons, and a bottle of rum for anesthesia were as terrifying as the injuries themselves. Theft from a shipmate was a cardinal sin. 40 lashes and double restitution was standard, with the offender sometimes branded with a hot iron for repeat offences. Blowing out another man's candle, a petty but disruptive act, could cost a week's rum or a night tied to the rigging. More creative punishments included sweating, where the offender ran laps around the deck under armed guard until he collapsed, gasping and sunburned. The drunkard's cloak was another favourite, a barrel with armholes, worn for days as the crew mocked the wearer's shame. Keel hauling, dragging a man under the ship's hull, was reserved for the worst crimes, like mutiny or stealing from the common hall. The barnacles and jagged planks could shred flesh, leaving the victim half drowned and bleeding. One captain's log describes a thief keel-hauled twice, emerging more fish than man, his survival a warning to others. The articles even regulated peacetime behaviour, trying to keep the crew from killing each other between raids. Fighting aboard ship was often banned, with disputes settled ashore in formal duels, complete with seconds to ensure fairness. Some codes required all conflicts to go through the quartermaster, who acted as judge and jury. Drinking was allowed but tightly controlled. No one could get drunk during a chase or battle, lest they jeopardize the ship. A few crews mandated a day of rest on Sundays, though whether this was observed with prayer or just extra rum is anyone's guess. One ship's articles even required men to wash their clothes weekly, a rule often ignored until the stench became unbearable. These regulations were about maintaining a fragile harmony, ensuring the crew functioned as a single deadly organism. Surprisingly, the articles extended some protections to enemy crews, revealing a pragmatic streak in pirate morality. Torturing prisoners was often forbidden unless critical information, like the location of hidden gold, was at stake. Merchant sailors who surrendered without a fight might be spared, even given a small boat to reach shore. Navy crews, seen as the Crown's enforcers, rarely got such mercy. This wasn't compassion, it was strategy. A reputation for occasional leniency encouraged quick surrenders, saving pirates the cost of a bloody fight. One account tells of a merchant captain gifted a bottle of wine for yielding his cargo without resistance, while his crew was set adrift with enough bread for 3 days. Terror was a tool, but so was calculated mercy. It spread faster than cannon fire and cost less. Life under the articles wasn't egalitarian by any modern measure. Captains dined on captured wine and slept in private cabins, while regular hands shared hammocks in the damp, rat-infested hold. Non-white pirates, often freed slaves or mixed-race sailors, faced smaller shares or outright exclusion, justified by flimsy excuses about experience or loyalty. Why, yet compared to the rigid hierarchies of navy or merchant ships, pirate governance was strikingly open. The articles were read aloud at the start of every voyage, and again during disputes, with witnesses ensuring no one twisted the rules. Every man, from the captain to the lowliest cabin boy, knew the terms and the consequences. This transparency didn't make life fair, but it made it predictable, a rare comfort in a world where a storm or a navy frigate could end everything in an instant. Discipline ebbed and flowed with the crew's fortunes. After a rich haul, a captain might wink at a drunken brawl or a missed watch. In lean times, when food was scarce and tempers frayed, stealing an extra biscuit could earn you a dozen lashes or a night in the bilge, ankle deep in foul water. The articles were only as strong as the crew's will to enforce them. A popular quartermaster might let a friend slide for a minor infraction. An unpopular one could face a knife in the dark for enforcing the rules too strictly. One ship's log recounts a sailor spared punishment for stealing rum because he'd saved the captain's life in a raid. A week later, another was flogged for the same crime, the crew's mood soured by a failed chase. The articles were a framework, but the crew's collective spirit was the true judge. Daily life aboard a pirate ship was a relentless cycle of labour, danger, and fleeting moments of camaraderie. The deck was never still. Men scrubbed barnacles from the hull, patched sails torn by storms, or hauled barrels of salted fish from the hold. The galley was a hell of its own, with a single iron pot simmering over a smoky fire, the cook dodging rats and roaches to serve up gruel or hardtack crawling with weevils. Sleep was a luxury, snatched in swaying hammocks or on the hard deck, interrupted by the creak of timbers or the shout of "sail ho" from the crow's nest. Meals were communal but tense, with men eyeing each other's portions, knowing every bite was rationed. The air reeked of tar, sweat, and the ever-present sea, a constant reminder of their isolation. Hygiene was a losing battle. Fresh water was too precious to waste on washing, so men went weeks without a bath, their clothes stiff with salt and grime. Lice and fleas thrived in the cramped quarters, burrowing into seams and bedding. The latrine, often just a plank overhanging the ship's side, was a perilous perch in rough seas, and missing it meant fouling the deck and facing the crew's wrath. Scurvy turned gums black and teeth loose, fevers swept through the hold like wildfire. The surgeon's cabin, if the ship had one, was a grim chamber of blood-stained tools and dwindling supplies, where a simple cut could turn septic in days. One log describes a crew losing half its men to dysentery after drinking tainted water from a captured cask, their moans haunting the ship for weeks. Men clung to ropes as waves crashed over the deck, knowing a single slip meant a cold, unmarked grave. Calms were just as deadly, leaving the ship becalmed for weeks, food and water dwindling as the sun baked the crew. Navigation relied on crude charts and a captain's gut, with no guarantee of spotting land before supplies ran out. One account tells of a crew stranded in the doldrums, forced to eat their leather belts before a breeze finally returned. The ocean was no respecter of the articles. It took what it wanted, and no vote could change that. Despite the hardship, there were moments of fleeting joy. A successful raid brought raucous celebrations. Rum flowed, songs echoed, and men danced under the stars, their fears drowned in drink. The articles ensured every man got his share of the revelry, with extra rations doled out to boost morale. Stories were told around the fire, tales of past hauls or narrow escapes, each man embellishing his own heroism. These moments of camaraderie, however brief, were what kept the crew together, a reminder that they were bound by more than just greed. Yet even in these highs, the shadow of the articles loomed over drink, and you'd face the whip, start a fight, and the quartermaster's ledger would record your punishment. The psychological toll of pirate life was as brutal as the physical. The constant threat of navy patrols, rival pirates, or mutiny kept every man on edge. Trust was a rare coin, spent sparingly. A crewmate might save your life one day and betray you the next for a larger share. The isolation of the sea amplified every fear. Every creak of the ship could be a navy frigate closing in, every shadow a traitor plotting in the dark. Sleep was restless, with one eye open for danger. The articles offered structure, but they couldn't quell the paranoia that festered in close quarters, where every whisper carried the weight of conspiracy. Pirate life was a paradox, a brutal, fleeting freedom defined by rules as rigid as any navy's. The articles were both a lifeline and a noose, holding the crew together while reminding them of their fragility. Every man who signed them knew the bargain: a chance at riches, a taste of defiance, and a daily dance with death. As they lay in their hammocks, the ship rocking beneath them, they could only hope the articles would hold, that the crew's fragile trust would outlast the next storm, and that the sea wouldn't claim them before their next prize. It was a life of constant tension, where survival demanded not just strength, but the cunning to navigate a world where every rule, every share, and every punishment was a gamble with their very lives. Some leaders manipulated crews by controlling information, announcing targets only when the ship was too committed to turn back. Others packed key roles with loyalists who'd back them during challenges. The system prevented outright tyranny, but didn't guarantee fairness. Pirates enforced rules more harshly against outsiders. Stealing from another ship was celebrated. Stealing from your own crew was punishable by death. The distinction mattered. Trust between pirates was the only thing keeping them alive. A man who'd cheat his shipmates might abandon them during battle, or sell them to authorities. The articles existed primarily to prevent betrayal from within. New recruits often didn't understand the system's nuances. Many expected pirate life to mean complete freedom from rules. They learned quickly that replacing kings with voting didn't mean replacing order with chaos. The articles weren't suggestions, they were survival mechanisms refined through trial and bloody error. The real surprise wasn't that pirates had rules. It's that they followed them at all. In an era when kings claimed divine right and merchant captains ruled by whim, pirates created a brutal but functional self-governance. Their system recognized that absolute freedom was suicide at sea. Some constraints were necessary to keep men from murdering each other over rum rations. Pirate democracy had teeth. Captains who abused power got removed. Quartermasters who showed favoritism found themselves outvoted. Even popular leaders couldn't ignore the articles completely. The crew's willingness to enforce them was the only real law aboard ship. This kept most captains from becoming the tyrants they'd supposedly escaped. The articles survived because they benefited everyone. Clear loot divisions prevented endless squabbling over spoils. Strict watches meant no single person got stuck with all the night shifts. Even harsh punishment served a purpose. Better to whip one thief than let stealing go unchecked until the whole crew starved. What looked like violence from the outside was often structured conflict resolution. Pirates didn't invent these systems from scratch. Many borrowed from older maritime traditions or adapted navy regulations to suit their needs. The innovation was making the rules apply equally to captains and crew. Traditional ships let officers break rules without consequence. Pirate ships held everyone accountable under the same penalties. The system worked because it had to. Merchant ships could dock and replace troublesome crew. Navy vessels had chains and brig cells. Pirates only had each other's grudging cooperation and the shared understanding that disorganization meant death. The articles weren't about idealism. They were the operating manual for a floating society of outcasts. Life under pirate rule wasn't fair by modern standards. But compared to the arbitrary cruelty of navy ships or plantation labor, their system offered something revolutionary. A pirate knew exactly what offences would cost him and what rights he could claim. In a world built on violence, that counted as justice. The paradox of pirate governance was that it blended democracy and brutality in equal measure. Captains got elected and deposed by votes held at sword point. Loot got divided fairly, with thieves whipped bloody for minor theft. Crews enjoyed freedoms unheard of on other ships, so long as they obeyed rules enforced with cutlass steel. It wasn't enlightened, but it worked. And so, life aboard was a paradox of control and conflict. So that's what piracy really was. Not some grand adventure, but a daily fight against disease, hunger, and each other. No buried treasure could make up for the mouldy biscuits or the surgeon's rusty saw. If you want more brutally honest history like this, hit subscribe and let me know what dark corner of the past we should explore next. And the next time someone romanticizes pirates, just picture yourself in that airless hold, listening to rats scuttle, smelling 200 unwashed bodies, and praying the ship doesn't sink before dawn. Maybe a 9 to 5 doesn't sound so bad after all.